The hours that slip toward tomorrow often pass with the subtlety of a shadow shifting across a sidewalk, barely noticed, yet leaving a faint trace. The calendar might not shout with spectacle. The sky, silent, remains unchanged. Yet something in the fabric of the day starts humming in a frequency most won't hear. It's not the obvious crossroads that signal change. Rather, it's the quiet distortion, like a gentle static in the air, that suggests reality is about to twist just enough to leave those sleepwalking through their routines unprepared. Some, however, walk around with their antennas already raised, picking up on signals no one else seems to catch. Is it possible to sense a turning point before it arrives, to know when the ground is about to shift beneath one's feet, even when the streets appear unchanged? Sometimes, a date on the calendar floats by almost invisibly, but for a rare few, that same date rings out like the first note in a long symphony. These are moments that don't shatter expectations with a crash. Instead, they seep into daily life with the persistence of roots growing under concrete. A shift begins with no announcement, no fireworks or warning sirens, yet a slow-motion sequence starts to unfold. The process doesn't ask whether the audience is ready. Those attuned to the subtle music of change are already adjusting their posture, reading meaning in pauses, catching a rhythm no one else seems to dance to. Ever wonder how some manage to be in the right place, just as a door swings open that no one else saw coming? Not all tides announce themselves with waves. On certain days, an undercurrent of unfamiliar energy starts weaving through ordinary hours, reframing what's possible. What was once called broken turns out to be the blueprint for what cannot return to the old shape. There is a feeling, not unlike the hush before a summer storm, when the atmosphere thickens with signals. Sometimes, one can sense something vast moving through the corridors of experience, as if the present is being rewritten before the ink of yesterday has dried. The mystery is this: does the shift seek permission, or is it the very refusal to wait that gives a moment its power? The body knows before the mind catches up. Some days, an invisible pressure makes the air feel denser, the world tighter around the edges, as if the room has shrunk a few inches. Restlessness arrives, not as a passing mood, but as a silent courier with a message. The familiar cycle is already fading. What had settled in the bones as habit or expectation finds itself uprooted, replaced by a persistent tension, like the pause before a verdict is read. There's a certain honesty in the discomfort, a way the body reveals truths the mind isn't ready to translate. Do we ever notice when the waiting ends and the living begins? Some awakenings don't come with permission slips. The awareness that unfolds isn't an item on a checklist, it's a gentle erosion of certainty, a slow turning of the soil beneath the surface. There are phases when reflection gives way to upheaval, when the inner monologue shifts from, "What now?" to, "What if this was always meant to be?" The usual cycle of analysis dissolves, replaced by the sense that something vital was never meant to remain locked inside. It's a kind of awakening that doesn't demand understanding. It simply arrives, fully formed, rewriting the rules of the day. And isn't it curious how, in these moments, the usual explanations lose their flavor, and new questions start growing in their place? Comfort was never the blueprint. There are days when a person's entire being seems constructed not for rest, but for traction, the kind that only friction can bring. Right now, beginnings rarely announce themselves as clarity. More often, they settle in as a kind of internal resistance, a growing tension in the background. Yet this tension, when looked at closely, isn't the mark of misalignment, it's simply stored motion waiting to break its chains. Some moments arrive not to invite patience, but to insist that what's overdue is about to burst through the door, and after today, withholding what needs to be spoken will serve as no shelter at all. Ever notice how momentum sneaks up, disguised as unrest? Not every edge signals danger. Lately, the sensation humming under the skin is not apprehension, but the raw hum of something being powered on. Imagine a switch buried somewhere deep, and suddenly it gets flipped, there's no reversing it, no dimmer to dial down. For a particular kind of person, the pull isn't optional or faint. It arrives like gravity, inescapable, demanding engagement. This is an energy that scoffs at the idea of avoidance or passive waiting. No amount of silent contemplation or breathwork can disperse its intensity. It's undeniable in its presence. Can a person ever truly ignore the charge when it's already lighting up the circuits from within? Anticipation does not come gently. Instead, a presence makes itself known, arriving with the density of a storm front, compressing the chest, flattening excuses, and declaring, without words, that forward is the only direction left. Some call it agitation, others a pulse of unease, but at its core, it's an undeniable invitation to movement, a catalyst that refuses to blend into the background. It doesn't wait for comfort, and it never asks if the moment is convenient. Ever wonder why so many mislabel the tremors of transformation as simply being on edge, when it's actually the beginning of an entirely new rhythm? The threshold before upheaval is sharper than most admit. There comes a point where sitting still feels toxic, and postponing what calls for action becomes a form of personal sabotage. The days of blending into delay evaporate once this current surges through the system. That once familiar comfort zone now burns like friction against exposed skin. With each second, it becomes harder to tolerate hesitation, and the pressure of holding back mutates into self-denial. Once the spark lands, returning to a life of stalled beginnings is simply not an option. Does anyone else feel the heat rising, the sense that what's hidden is about to step out into the open, ready or not? There are days when what's moving inside isn't a spark of inspiration, but more like a swelling tide behind a dam. When inner pressure rises, it rarely arrives as a gift-wrapped insight. It presses against the bones, demanding release. It's the kind of intensity that makes standing still feel like suffocating in a room with shrinking walls. No cosmic announcement signals the moment, but suddenly, stalling feels impossible and the need to shift becomes a physical ache. Ever notice how some days, the call to act drowns out every comfortable reason to stay put? Pretending to drift through the hours unnoticed quickly loses its charm. A point arrives where the internal engine can't be muted, and the surrounding world seems to recalibrate itself to this new signal. Interactions change, spaces feel charged, and the atmosphere grows heavy with reactions that defy ordinary explanation. What's often dismissed as mere personality or chance is actually a ripple of energy, broadcast, received, and reflected whether conscious or not. Who hasn't seen a room grow restless or oddly attentive when someone walks in carrying a pulse they can't hide? Certain days flip a circuit, making passivity unsustainable. Suddenly, the weight of what's been kept under wraps is transferred to every object, every person, every glance. The force long contained no longer adapts to the crowd. Instead, it draws out reactions that can't be rationalized away. Magnetism becomes tangible, not just in charm or likability, but in the way it unsettles or electrifies others. Some are pulled closer by this unspoken current, others feel a subtle alarm, as if their boundaries have been quietly tested. Isn't it odd how a presence alone can alter the emotional temperature in a room? The landscape of conversation shifts. Stories pour out, silences grow charged, and glances linger with questions unspoken. The change isn't random, it's a domino effect that begins the moment authenticity stops hiding in the shadows. One person's shift nudges others, stirring what's dormant and drawing forward what's restless. The uninitiated might misinterpret this as simple luck or tension, but it's neither. It's a wave, contagious in its effect, igniting all that remains asleep. Have you ever wondered why your arrival unsettles even those who don't know your story? This movement isn't about drawing the gaze or feeding the ego. Alignment with what's real and unedited is its own disturbance, especially to systems built on routine and emotional autopilot. The shift has nothing to do with strategy or performance. It's a quiet but seismic alteration of being. The world registers this, sometimes with resistance, sometimes with awe. True transformation is never about what's on display. It's about the subtle, unstoppable evolution from within. And maybe the real question is, how long can the truth wait before insisting on being seen? Contagion isn't just a biological event, it's woven into the fabric of awareness. When one person's inner world catches fire, others feel the heat, and soon, what was once internal starts leaking into the collective. Yet, if energy can sweep a room, truth has a way of crashing through walls altogether. The days of moving quietly are coming to an end. Suddenly, the scenery seems to lean in, watching closely. A strange sensation arises, not quite anxiety but the subtle recognition that the world is now paying attention. Has anyone else felt that mysterious shift, where every move feels magnified by unseen eyes? This heightened presence isn't just about crowded sidewalks or a buzzing phone, it arrives in the emptiest spaces. Somewhere deep in the psyche, an unmistakable weight builds, a tension not born of threat, but of being noticed on a level beyond logic. There are moments when a room feels populated by intentions rather than bodies, a silent company lingering just outside the field of vision. This marks a turning point for many seekers, the start of a kind of transparency that goes beyond physical light. What was once quiet in the soul now pulses like a beacon, undeniable, impossible to mute. Ever wonder if something ancient has just started reading your thoughts? Visibility isn't a rumor, it's a current that glows beneath the surface, connecting those whose frequencies have shifted. It's as if the inner circuitry has been rewired to broadcast a signal, attracting attention not only from fellow travelers but also from entities invested in maintaining the old rhythms. Some of these watchers feel rooted in the earliest stories of consciousness itself. Others simply slip in when the boundaries feel weakest. As the signal strengthens, being unnoticed becomes a luxury that fades. Isn't it curious how, once a person's inner voltage rises, the very atmosphere responds as if to track their progress? At times, the very boundary between the personal and the unseen seems to develop a memory, a kind of sentience. The invisible curtain between worlds doesn't just thin, it starts tracking movement, registering each pulse and intention. On such days, even familiar spaces develop a different texture. Walls seem to listen, the air pulses with an unspoken charge, and the instinct to look over one's shoulder grows. Small sounds stand out. Shadows linger just a bit longer than they should. Has anyone else ever sensed a ripple in the ordinary, as if something just slipped past the edge of sight? Attention from beyond isn't always a blessing. Sometimes growth demands visibility, and with it comes a side effect, exposure. The mind may resist, but the body knows this is not just paranoia, it's the awakening of a signal too bold to hide. The higher the frequency, the more obvious the opposition, often surfacing as friction, odd resistance, or a heavy presence in the room. Yet this resistance doesn't signal failure. Rather, it is the echo of movement in the right direction, the universe's way of marking a path through uncharted territory. So, what if the very pushback felt lately is just confirmation that the journey is finally being seen? Sometimes the urge to withdraw arrives suddenly, like a weather front rolling in unannounced. Canceling appointments, ducking out of plans, shutting down conversations, or putting the phone on silent becomes instinct, not out of avoidance, but as a subtle act of inner recalibration. In moments of heightened observation, energy pivots to a mode of conservation, anchoring itself for balance rather than hiding from the world. An unseen audience gathers, some bringing quiet support, others determined to scatter distraction like gravel on a smooth path. Isn't it odd how presence alone can turn the invisible into a stage? Where some connections empower, others attempt to scramble the signal, nudging attention off course with petty diversions or foggy confusion. The awareness is constant now. Invisibility is a thing of the past, replaced by a spotlight that never dims. Faces around the table may not have shifted, but their resonance does. Suddenly, familiar voices sound like echoes from a different frequency, the words landing but the meaning feeling oddly hollow. Has anyone else noticed how certain exchanges now ring empty, like music played through a wall? After a turning point, a quiet divide appears, often not between rivals or those who have caused harm, but between paths that stopped intertwining. The difference is rarely marked by dramatic scenes or broken alliances. More often, it's a silent divergence, felt rather than spoken. The fork in the road isn't loud, but its presence is unmistakable. What's it like to sit across from someone and realize the current has shifted, the connection now just a faint signal rather than a vibrant pulse? Emotional distance often settles in without warning. Conversations stall, silences linger, and once bright connections feel like faded memories revisited out of habit. There's no need for blame, nor does judgment serve any purpose. Those who have stopped evolving are not enemies, their chapters simply end where growth paused. The energetic field recognizes this before the mind does. Old patterns don't stick, and a gentle detachment takes hold. Isn't it strange how the heart lets go quietly, without ceremony? The journey stings most when love and loyalty linger. Caring doesn't end overnight, nor does affection dissolve without warning, but the new frequency demands a different kind of honesty. That sinking feeling in the gut, the fog that creeps in during old routines, these are the body's subtle alerts that the past cannot be carried forward. Old connections become heavy. Nostalgia feels like a weight instead of comfort. What's heavier than knowing what was real is now only static in the background. There's an ache to realizing that a once-alive bond is now just a faint trace, its music replaced by static. Hierarchies don't matter here. The only measure is movement. When energy rises, what lags behind grows dense, and it's this weight that quietly guides partings. There is no thunderous exit, no grand scene. Instead, distance grows like moss, slow, silent, and unresisted. Does anyone else find it jarring to see the familiar slip away in near silence? Plans evaporate, messages dwindle, and a part of the mind yearns to patch what's unraveling, to glue together old stories, to keep every piece in play. But a living current can't support what's outgrown its rhythm. Even stranger, many who drift away aren't aware of the gap. Their spirit steps aside before their manner does. The exterior remains, still offering polite questions and practiced smiles, but the presence is already gone. How often do goodbyes happen long before anyone utters a word? Spiritual distance is rarely a loud event. Sometimes, it's just an absence where presence used to be. There's no need to force reunions with what's faded or chase echoes that don't respond. After a major shift, the path narrows and clarity sharpens. Not everyone can navigate the new terrain. Even as peace settles in and the self feels finally whole, the old patterns can still reappear, knocking with uncanny familiarity. Isn't it something, how old echoes know the way back, even after transformation feels complete? Sometimes what's been buried under the floorboards doesn't creep up quietly, it rattles the whole house. Old triggers can return with a sudden intensity, setting nerves on edge or flooding the mind with rivalry where none exists. Emotions long thought dormant begin to flash up, swift and sharp, as if setting off sparks just to be noticed. Restlessness, jealousy, impatience, these can all surge through the system without warning, their origins untraceable. What if, in these hours, the storm isn't a step backward but a sign of boundaries about to break for good? Instincts may scream for action, say something, prove a point, chase closure, but this isn't regression. It's a prelude to release. Patterns that once controlled the inner world make a final, noisy attempt to reclaim ground. These are not battles to win, nor shadows to suppress. This is the last echo of habits that once thrived under the old light. The urge to react, to retreat into self-doubt or comparison, is a distraction, a parting shot from an identity dissolving in real time. Perhaps it's time to ask, can a self outgrown ever truly return? What's required now isn't resistance or struggle, but observation. The mind is called to witness its own shedding, to see emotional residue flicker out and fade. No guidance can be found in these flare-ups. They are fragments being carried out by the tide. Approval-seeking, self-sabotage, overthinking, these echoes linger only as reminders of what no longer fits. These versions survived by living in the center of attention, but that spotlight is moving on. What does it feel like to watch an old story close, not with a fight, but with a quiet fading? Each outgrown pattern thrived when it had the stage. But now, as the curtain falls, its influence wavers. So when restlessness rises or old reactions flare, there's no need to diagnose or defend. Let it burn out. Let it complete its noisy exit. This is not a sign of failure but a mark of transition, the old guard giving way to what's next. The person who kept apologizing for their own fire is quietly stepping off stage, no longer needed in the next act. The world won't always celebrate a person's clarity. Stillness gets misread as distance, and quiet strength sometimes threatens those hooked on confusion. There's a tendency for some to feel unsettled, to push back or challenge what isn't actually closing off, but simply tuning out the static of the world. In a society obsessed with noise, silence is misjudged, presence mistaken for absence. Yet this is the paradox. The more deeply one listens inward, the less need there is for outward explanation. Isn't it strange how composure can send tremors through a room addicted to chaos? Discernment sharpens as old ways of seeking vanish. The gaze stops searching for answers outside and, instead, pierces through surfaces, reading between the lines, grasping meaning before words are even spoken. The quiet becomes its own language, and every sentence becomes an architect of tomorrow. There are days that offer pivotal moments, cloaked in routine, a chance encounter, an unexpected message, or a truth rising in the chest that's waited for just this moment to break through. Has anyone else noticed how the most ordinary days can open hidden doors? Sometimes, intensity builds like a charge under the skin, as if a choice is on the verge of being made. The pressure isn't just emotional, it's architectural. Each act of expression or restraint will set stones into the foundation of the week ahead. Some moments invite truth that feels raw, even risky. Other times, silence itself is the most honest response, even when every fiber wants to leap forward. The question isn't only whether to speak, but what will be built or undone by the energy carried in that decision. Not every word floats away on the wind. Some settle, sculpting the contours of days to come. Thursday's dialogue isn't just about the words chosen, but about the blueprints they become. Vulnerability may want to step out, or retreat may feel safer than honesty. But these choices ripple, weaving the map of the days ahead. Ever wonder why some conversations feel as if they echo for weeks, shaping what follows in subtle, persistent ways? This is less a moral test and more an energetic rite of passage. The urge to hold back, to go along with what's safe, to offer a polite version of the truth, these aren't trivial choices. Each one sets the direction for momentum that's been bottled up. When self-expression falters, a strange feedback loop begins. Life starts returning those muted frequencies in odd, often inconvenient ways. The world doesn't punish, it mirrors. Misunderstandings can snowball, plans unravel. Energy that isn't aligned with conviction will stall even the most promising paths. This isn't about making noise, but about the calibration of intent and timing. Words become keys, every phrase a doorway, some open, others close. What's left unsaid can be as powerful as what's declared, and every choice is a pivot. Who else has felt a conversation rearrange reality in real time? The question lingers, is the message delivered in full color, or is it dulled to blend in? Watered-down truth has a cost, an inner contraction, a stifling that makes itself known. That tension, that pressure in the chest or tightness in the throat, is not just nerves. It's instinct, the compass urging a step forward. Breaking through hesitation isn't just liberating, it's transformative. Ever notice how the room listens differently when authenticity finally breaks through? Disruption is rarely comfortable, and tomorrow may bring exactly that. A missed connection, a plan gone sideways, a sudden reroute. What first appears as a setback is often a nudge, a gentle ejection from a path that was never really meant to last. Sometimes doors close not to punish, but to position. The chaos isn't random, it's choreography. A missed appointment, an abrupt change, the forced pause that makes stillness unavoidable. These moments aren't obstacles, they're transitions in disguise. What blocks progress now is only making room for something better to arrive from a direction never anticipated. Rejection is only redirection when seen with new eyes. How many times has an unwelcome detour become the most important turning point? Sometimes, the mind is asked to surrender logic in favor of intuition, to lean into the offbeat rhythm rather than the day's original plan. It might mean ending up in unfamiliar places, crossing paths with faces that weren't on the list, or stumbling onto a message that lands with uncanny resonance. Odd coincidences, those moments that tug at the edge of attention, are the signals. Disregard for the agenda opens the door to discoveries no checklist could ever produce. Have you ever noticed how the best breakthroughs seem to arrive as surprises, not scheduled events? What feels like a mistake or a delay often turns out to be the hidden delivery of something necessary. The urge to restore order, to piece things back together, is strong, but this time, broken routines are not malfunctions, they're invitations. The disruption isn't theft, it's preparation. The loss of control is merely space clearing for a gain not yet imagined. Falling out of step isn't falling behind, it's a recalibration for perfect alignment. By the end of the day, those small irritations might reveal themselves as the pivot points that changed everything. At times, life feels like waiting in a silent room moments before demolition. The most profound shifts rarely announce themselves with fireworks. They're veiled in simplicity, disguised as just another ordinary hour. August 1st holds this secret, transformations hiding in plain sight. To the unobservant, the day passes like any other, but for the tuned-in, stillness is a sign of deep movement. Sometimes, the ordinary is the camouflage for the most sacred changes. Underneath the mundane, the final pulse of a former self is already fading. After the threshold, connections begin to feel different. Conversations that once flowed easily now stutter or echo strangely, and what was once familiar begins to shimmer at the edges, slipping just out of reach. Even once loved places begin to feel foreign, like walking through a favorite memory that no longer matches reality. This is the quiet unraveling of an old rhythm, making room for a new one to take root. Nothing explodes, but nothing stays the same. The nervous system registers the change even before the mind can name it. Gradually, the world seems to lose its old taste. Days later, the realization lands, a handshake that once brought comfort is suddenly hollow, or a favorite song sounds artificial and flat. The language of emotion itself is rewriting, upgrading to something incompatible with what once was. Isn't it odd how subtle changes in sensation can signal such massive shifts inside? These moments aren't fatigue, nor are they disinterest. They're the signal that a deep rewiring is underway. The old codes are dissolving. Motivation hasn't vanished, it's just searching for a new circuit. The soul is quietly untangling itself from the patterns and places that shaped its earliest stories, reaching instead for something wider and wilder. The connection to the old world is unplugging, the signal now tuning to frequencies that speak in possibility and not in limits. Have you ever felt yourself outgrow a whole reality, almost without noticing?